And the point is like that you start to realize like people see the world really differently and they make different choices. And then the idea is how can you connect with that person and still solve the same problem, but without frustration, because you're realizing that it's not that they're trying to be difficult with you, they just completely see the world differently.
Well, it's Chris G here, Hard Hat CEO, and we're going to talk about something fun today. Uh, if you're a contractor, well, anybody for that matter, understands the employee situation at this point. And we're going to discuss about retention because it takes a lot to get them, takes a lot to train them, and it's probably going to take a lot to keep them. And to keep them is going to be very valuable to us. And I have a nice friend here all the way from Stamford, Connecticut to help us do that. Francie Jain. Francie, how are you today?
I'm doing so well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Francie, can you, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, let's see. I started this business called Terawatt, and it's a B2B marketplace, and we connect employers to experts and coaches, and we help them, fix different problems within organizations. And a lot of times when I tell people that, they're like, well, why would I do that? Or that's a nice to have, maybe that's a luxury. And so my pitch is like, actually, there's a lot of data about the investment in human capital and what that can do for businesses. So I'm always interested in just talking about, what can change for people when they invest in it. It's not like kind of a luxury. And that's sort of that's what I like to talk about. That's sort of my main thing.
Well, let's dive into that. So one of the solutions some companies have is someday we'll be run by robots, maybe, who knows? But I like to talk about keep the people you have and then get more out of them. And I don't mean like a whip, but use automations, use technology to your advantage and still keep those people because they're family. So what do you talk about when you talk about retention? How do we achieve that?
Yeah. So the really interesting thing that I think about all the time is there's press in the was it 2015 that Google had done a long survey, like years long, trying to figure out what sort of tied together the best teams within Google. And there's like the teams that came up with new products or that were like come up with efficiencies, save money, whatever that was. However, they actually never even defined what best teams were, but that's just my definition. I'm assuming it has to do with revenue because it's a business. But
more than likely,
we don't exactly know, but we'll say best teams. And so I think that what I like about that definition is everyone can decide for themselves what the best team would be for their organization. So anyway, so they learned that the best teams, the single uniting thread across the whole organization was a high degree of psychological safety. And what that means is that you can say what you think without fear of being told you're wrong, or without fear of losing your job, or without fear of any number of things. And so it's this idea of, it's not physical safety, which is probably a big issue in the construction land, but it's more about just everyone's respected for their viewpoints. And it may not be that what someone wants to have happen will happen, but everyone's interested to hear their viewpoint, and then some decision will be made. And it's kind of fascinating because you think when you describe it, you're like, yeah, that just sounds like doesn't everyone have that? And it turns out it's actually quite rare, because I think in many businesses, the perspective of the owner especially is, I tell you to do it and you say yes, that's why I'm paying you. And but I think that the in between there is, even though you're perhaps a boss telling someone to do something, you also want them to give you the feedback, because you may know more than the boss knows. Or as an employer, you want that person to know more than you know because they're closer to it. And so I think that there's that perspective where you really want to find a way where you get the good information from people so you make better decisions. And in a construction context, the other thing I think about is I also this book, this book, Turn the Ship Around.
Yeah.
Okay. It was written by a naval captain of a nuclear submarine. And I was thinking it's very similar to construction, because he was trying to figure out how do we do better as a team, like a submarine with these drills. And
Right.
basically what he figured out was, instead of it being top down, instead of me telling them like which screw to use on how to when to repair something, they proposed to me what they're going to do because they have much more information and they've done much more research. And then I can ask questions or approve it or ask for a change or whatever. And anyway, so the idea is finding ways to have more of an active dialogue so that people don't feel like they are a robot, right? They feel like their brain is being used. And then in the end, the best decisions are made with a lack of groupthink. And the great example of that one always is, if you're old enough to remember New Coke,
Hmm.
when the ad wizards of Coca-Cola came out and they're like, we're going to have new Coke. And everyone's like, what? I want the old Coke. I don't want new Coke. And apparently there's a case study done on that. And it was that everyone on the team thought the same way. They didn't have any detractors. So there
Yeah.
was no one on the team to be like, no, this is not a good idea. And or like, oh, I have a question or I have doubts, I worry, you know what I mean? There's no one to like give them pause. And that could have really saved the company a lot of money.
Well, let's talk a little about. I want to go back to that team thing and everybody, but I want to talk about the respect part. You're
Yeah.
respecting your people to talk to you. Well, that goes both ways too.
Yeah.
Because I've told I talk about. I was like, okay, I want you to come tell me things. I want you to be smarter than I am,
Yeah.
and either I'm going to prove you wrong, and I don't mean that negatively. I'm going to explain to you why I think I'm right. But I want you to be smarter than me, and then, but whatever we decided, you're still the leader, and whatever we decide from the information you're giving me and other people are giving me, we're going to make a decision and move forward. It might not be your way. It
100%.
might be the other person's way, but we all got to move forward as a team with input. And I think that's very
100%.
important.
100%. And that's actually, I think that's like almost like the big logical jump that people have a concern about, which is, well, what happens if the person who's giving you the information, who's the leader, disagrees, right? You're having a little debate and you're like, no, I want to do it this way. And then the key is for that person to say, you know what, I disagree, but because you are the boss, I will do it your way. And that's okay, right? Because there may be other reasons that are playing into your decision making that person doesn't know about. But I
Absolutely.
think that and that's where the trust comes in, where that person has to say, okay, you know what, I trust you that this is the best decision for our organization. And part of also what that is about is that everyone has the same North Star, right? Which is the best result.
Hmm.
Sometimes people don't operate under the best result. Like they're not operating for the best, they're operating for some politics or who knows what they're operating for, ego. I don't know, who knows what they're solving for. And I think that's kind of the point of psychological safety too, which is like everyone's kind of on the same path, trying to do this with the same goal in mind. And I think it's also like uniting people so that like it's really clear like what we're working towards. We're not working towards like you being the smartest person in the room. We're working towards the
Yeah.
best product or the best result, whatever the thing is.
Well, as a leader, you're seeing the bigger picture. They have more knowledge, not knowledge, but they know more things that's going to affect things.
Right,
So
exactly. Exactly. I think it's more complicated, right? I think sometimes when you're the leader, you may not even be able to articulate the 10 things you're thinking about and like why you make a decision. Whereas the lower person is, the person who's reporting to that person is probably a little more singularly focused on whatever that exact thing is, as opposed to the bigger picture. And so I guess my point is really just like
sure.
when you're able to create an environment where problems are solved without people being retaliated against, in a really healthy way, that's when people stay. And one of the things that also has come up with these conversations I've been having with people is that if you think about it, there's a lot of especially during COVID, there's a lot of discussion of, people don't want to work anymore. You can't pay them enough and enough. And I think that like the pay thing is almost like a distraction, because I think that if you pay someone fairly and they're at an organization where they're like really learning a lot and growing as a worker, then I don't think a difference of 50 cents more an hour it's not going to make a difference to them. It's not reason to leave. Like if you're really happy and things are firing in all cylinders, it would take multiples of your salary to leave because things are going so well for you. Like, why would you leave? It's a big risk when you're in an organization that's working well. it's a great place to be, day in, day out. And so I think that like that's a really important part of this too, which is that you can actually get away, I mean, in quotes, get away with, but I mean, you can just pay people fairly. It doesn't have to be above average as long as things are well managed and leadership is done well.
Let's go to that new Coke example you were giving.
Yeah.
You're talking about teams and they're all on the same side. And you do want teams that work well together. And apparently they work real well with New Coke, except they didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. So how do you create a team that can do that and still function? I mean, you don't want to throw a wrench into the gears,
Yeah.
but you do want somebody to, I don't want to say play devil's advocate. That's not what I'm saying, but you want some different,
100%, 100%. Well, I'll tell you, it's a great question. Yes, I think your question is, how do you come up with sort of diversity of thought, but still get people that work together that gel well? I think that's
well,
the
see,
question, right?
I want,
Yeah.
I want you to be the host, please.
No,
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
I understand exactly what you mean, because exactly, you don't want someone who's running around being like, this is terrible, it's a terrible idea, like, let's not do this. I'm more saying, like, you just want people with different perspectives who are saying, like, I wonder, could this be like, there's I forget what it was, but there's also some study done about like buses, like the bus system, and like it doesn't work for women for like 10 different reasons, as well as it works for men, like the bus system. And it's like, but there are no people in like transport, there were no like women in transportation who like understood the female perspective, and that's like 50% of the population. So it's just like, you want to have just like different people who have the same, North Star, but a different perspective. So, so there are ways where you can actually hire people based on like personality types, or you can at least evaluate their personality types and like what matters to them. The thing that I always talk about is like, I'm not an expert on that. We certainly have we have like 100 coaches, and they all have different personality tests that they'll give. But the one that I have great experience with was I did a Myers-Briggs personality test in like business school. And it was the first time I ever had one. And I was like, almost 30. And I like, my mind was blown because it turned out I was an off the charts extrovert. And I am motivated by relationships, but I never would have defined myself as an extrovert. And knowing that was really valuable. Another thing that came up with that is I was like a little bit more than average a feeler, meaning like I felt, I feel things more than I sort of like think them. And apparently the new Coke people, they were all thinkers. There were no feelers on the team.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of thing they could have done. They could have just said, with this big of a rebrand, let's just like do, make sure that we're thinking about this thoughtfully, maybe even they could have even had like focus groups or something, right? I mean, I don't, it's kind of crazy that when that came out, really, when you think about how much energy and cost went into that and how wrong they were. And so I think that like definitely personality tests can be helpful because you can kind of map out how people are the same or different. And I don't mean like that some personalities are good and some personalities are bad. It's more like complementary and who's bringing what to the table. And maybe even you could say, wow, look, when you map it out, you can say that, oh, look, there's a big hole in this area and we don't have someone representing that viewpoint. And then as you start to hire, you can really like look for that person to bring onto the team. Because ultimately the thing is everyone just wants the best decisions. I mean, in the end, it's just people have different problems with getting there. And I think if you help yourself out with a good process, you'll be more likely to get there.
Well, I jumped down in that rabbit hole, and then you kind of helped me. Let's get out of that one and go into another one, maybe. The episode's about retention. So it's not about building a team. We already have the team, let's say, and how do we keep those people? And obviously, you've done a lot of studies about money, how that all affects the bottom line. So can you share a bit about that?
Yeah. So we have this incredible case study. So our businesses, we have all different coaches who work with us. We have like a revenue share with them. Basically, it's like kind of like Airbnb. It's like a good analogy. And so one of our coaches has created a training system about, learning about yourself. And it's also a little bit about personality assessment. And so his system was brought into a large healthcare organization in Colorado. And the healthcare, it was 4,500 people. at the healthcare organization, and they had 24% voluntary employee turnover. So 24% of their employees are leaving every year. The average for healthcare is 20%. So they're worse than average. And by the way, they weren't in Denver, in Colorado. They're in like a smaller town. So that's also another problem. Like you can't,
Sure.
it's not like you can keep pulling from the
Draw
population.
people. Yeah, you only have so many.
No one's moving in and out. Yeah. So like they were really starting to get, I think the reason they pulled him in is they were like, this is unsustainable. Like at some point we're going to just have a problem. So, and so for healthcare, it's a little different. Well, it might be similar to construction. You'll have to tell me. But in healthcare, there are ways to plug holes. So there are things called like traveling nurses, where let's say you can't hire people or too many people have quit, but you can get these traveling nurses for like 3 months or 4 months, but you pay them 1.5 or 2 times the going rate.
Yeah.
Just to like get butts and seats, get butts and seats or whatever people say, in every industry. Is there one for construction industry, like a little?
In bigger cities, there is, because they're paying multiple pay, or even government workers where they're getting the high dollar fees. But in smaller communities, not as much. But Tradesmen's International, for example, has part-time workers ready trained and ready to fill the spot if they can. Obviously, they cost more and so forth, and they come in. They know their job. They know how to read plans, but they're not part of the team necessarily.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That is the exact analogy. Okay, so traveling nurses are just what do you call that?
Tradesmen's
Part-time.
International.
Tradesmen International. It's the exact analogy. Exactly the same thing. So I suspect that they were doing a lot of plugging holes with this traveling nurse tradesmen international thing. And so they were like, okay, let's, and just to remember, probably similar to construction, healthcare is very hierarchical because the process, there's a plan, someone has to be in charge because you can't have 10 cooks in the kitchen like during surgery.
No.
You have to have one person deciding what's happening, otherwise it's chaos. So that, like bleeds into the whole operations of the place. So they brought in his content, and it's called opposite strengths. And really the idea is saying like, listen, you're strong in this one area. This is how you think. And there are other people who actually think the opposite way. And when you get together, you make really good decisions. And so it's a little bit about respect. It's a little bit about understanding how to like connect with someone who sees the world really differently. And it's a little bit about being flexible and how you solve problems, because when you're working with someone who's different, and they see the world differently, you have to find this way to like bridge the gap. And so it was like a group coaching. The way they brought it in was through the group, right? There's a trainer, and people would come. It was opt-in. You could just come if you wanted. It was during work time. You didn't have to come. You come if you wanted. But what started happening is the people who were going ended up like becoming really successful at their jobs and finding good ways to solve problems. And so began attracting other people because they started to realize the why. It wasn't like, you have to do this training, go here, and everyone sat there being mad and pissed. They were like, had to be forced to do some training. But it was like, because they were opting in, they were much more interested to learn like the secrets were and what other people knew. And what was cool about it is that every year they did this training, their employee turnover dropped 1% to 2% a year. So there's like a chart you can imagine. It's kind of like going like this. And eventually, after 9 years, they're at 4% voluntary
turnover.
Yeah, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a far above average for a hospital, right? Because if you think about back to the 20%, which is what the average is, so they're above average. So they're in a small town. And then what started happening is they started winning awards, because then they're firing in all cylinders, right? No one's leaving. They're all solving problems. They're coming up with efficiencies. And then what was crazy about the whole thing is it looks great on the chart, right? You're like, oh my God, that's great. And they started winning awards, like, yay. But here's the thing. The difference between 24% employee turnover and 4% employee turnover was $32 million a year. And that, like, when you hear that number, it just like blows your mind, because you're like, you could build a new fancy facility every year for $32 million. You could give people raises, you give people bonuses. You're in offense position now. You decide, what do you want to do? Like, what's your goal? And that's a really different position to be in than just to be like plugging holes with part-time people because you can't get people to stay long enough. And so that's the reason why to do it. And then the part about that is, I can guarantee you they're spending less than $32 million a year on this training
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So the
Well,
ROI
was
is
it?
high. Yeah,
Yes, it is.
yeah.
Was it training more on how to be better decision makers, how to cooperate, or was it kind of
It's
they didn't
really
have an idea until
well.
they kind of got going?
It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, it was really just because I can tell you kind of some of the things he's actually. I have it right here. We're doing a presentation. It's actually really fun. So one of his things is like you have to come up with. You have to. So it gives you two options, and you kind of identify with one, and then it starts to help you like see how people are really quite different. So like this is one here. So it's like you have these cards. So it's the first one is I have a ready willingness to consider the views of others. And then the other one is I want to achieve on my own merits. And when I first see these, I'm like, they are not the same. How am I supposed to evaluate this? But you have to just pick one. You have to just like kind of go with your gut a little bit. And so the point is that the person who's strong in I have a ready willingness to consider the values of others has the opposite strengths of the person who wants to achieve on their own merits. And the point is like that you start to realize like people see the world really differently and they make different choices. And then the idea is how can you try to connect with that person and still solve the same problem, but without frustration because you're realizing that it's not that they're trying to be difficult with you, they just completely see the world differently.
How important to retention is a suggestion box?
Okay, I'll tell you. Great question. So I think all this kind of suggestions and feedback stuff with employees,
Mhm.
the important part is the transparency. So like, for instance, if I had a company and I had a feedback box, I think almost like you probably, to really gain the trust of your employees, you
Yeah.
probably like monthly want to then like write it up and have people know what people are saying in the box. So I would make it clear like what's being said in the box. And then I would respond to each of the things and say, this is a great idea. Like, let's do this. We hadn't thought about this. And here's how we're going to do it, X, Y, Z. Number two, I'm being facetious, like you're
Right,
crazy.
right, right.
That will never happen.
Not going to happen. That's
Yeah,
right.
we will never provide you free transportation to work. But good idea one day, maybe, I don't know. But the idea is to like then respond. And because what happens is when people feel like they're being listened to and things are changing as a result of their ideas, that's
Mhm.
part of psychological safety. So, but I think it's also perfectly fine to say, listen, like, sure, you want to have your pay doubled. Don't we all? You know what I mean? Like there's some things that people are going to say that are a little bit crazy and out there, but I don't think it's a bad thing to like, and if it's anonymous, you can post it and let people know what's being said and just say, and then you give the like corporate response, like we just can't afford to do that right now. But thanks for sending in your comment. And and the reason I say all this is like we had a similar thing with the training with a bunch of doctors in Boston, and we had a survey. We sent them out a survey. It was anonymous. And then we tallied it and we gave it back to them and said, here's what you all have said. And as a result, we're going to do this kind of training because you voted for this, you asked for this. And it's interesting because before we did the survey, we were going to do a different kind of training. But because this is what the employees wanted versus the buyer thought they wanted this thing. They thought they wanted stuff to burn out, but the employees really wanted stuff about how to like communicate better, how to negotiate better. And so that's what we did for them. And then it went really well because again, they voted for it. Like they wanted to do it. It wasn't like we're saying, you need to learn about burnout. And because I think that like one of the big things like with humans that I always every day I like try to remember and work on is like they want to choose like for themselves, but that doesn't mean that they get to have free reign and everyone gets like an award or a blue ribbon. It just means that like you have to find ways to get them to buy in to like what you're working on so that like then it goes better.
Vision, I assume, is very important to the people, to our people, to
Well,
kind of
yeah,
know where they're going.
yeah. I mean, I think it's all part of this whole thing of like, good dialogue and trust and understanding. So I think if you can say, like for that one example we were talking about earlier, where let's say the head of the organization is talking to like a leader, and the head doesn't want to do what the leader is saying, like, oh, we should really dig this hole, right? And the,
Mhm.
and the boss is like, I'm not like, no, we're not going to do that right now because he's got like 10 other things in his brain. But it would be helpful for that boss to let everyone know what the 10 other things are.
Sure.
So the decision making is not in a vacuum. So everyone kind of can track his decision making. And I think that like it's that kind of thing where like the more that you can talk about, and you could say, listen, like, oh, maybe we should have a meeting so everyone knows we're not digging this hole because actually we have this other project over here or whatever. We're going to do this other thing first. And maybe that just happened last week and you guys aren't aware of it. You know what I mean? Like the more that you can kind of bring people into, I think, your decision making, the more they're willing to get on board, even when they don't really disagree, they don't really agree, right? But you still have to say, like, this is what our North Star is going to be for it now. And we'll get to that whole later, but that's just like not a priority.
I got my sidetrack. Gosh, dang, I was thinking about numbers. I guess I'll go to that question then. Is there an amount of people that makes a good group, or you get too many people?
Good question. Well, I think that, yeah, that is a good question. So let's see. I feel like it depends if it's online or in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like, let's say, I'd say 1 to 20 is very doable online and on person. Like if you have one trainer, one coach, about 20 people, it starts to get a little hairy over that. I think that you can do it in person. You can have higher ratios in person, meaning like you could have 40 to 1 possibly. But I think that what happens is you want to have it be a low enough ratio where people can raise their hand and ask questions, and it can like have a more conversational tone. Because when it starts to get really high, it is very training and like, let me tell you. And at some point, people are kind of like, being talked at. And I think, there's a lot of research showing for like adult pedagogy. So how adults learn is through the interaction and through talking and through like, connecting and reflecting and writing, but all these different ways that adults learn. And so you want to have more of an interactive session because people will learn better and they will just be more engaged. So the key then is to figure out if you're going to have a high ratio, like how do you keep them engaged? And so that's sort of the question. Is I don't know if the ratio matters as much as like the strategy for engagement, so that people feel like they're able to ask questions and like have conversations. Because one of the things, I don't know about you, but I'm always sitting in like not a meeting but some sort of informational session, and I think, oh, here's a really dumb question. But I bet a lot of people have that really dumb question, and sometimes you just need to have the dumb questions answered. But if you're going to have like 100 people in the room or 1,000, it's like you're less likely to ask the dumb question, because I think it just seems a little bit intimidating.
I think the fact that they like people asking those questions, because now they think, well, at least A, somebody else is thinking it, and B, I didn't have to ask it myself.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
I recall what I was going to say earlier. So I'm a big picture person, and what we're basically saying is, as long as you're paying competitive wages, it's not about the money, that it's about retention. It's more about the communication. Would that be a
Yeah,
big picture statement?
I think it's the communication 100%, and I think it's also about the psychological environment, like the environment and how people feel on the other side. Like, do people feel stressed and under pressure and scared, or
Okay.
do they feel motivated and excited and energized? So I think that like that's to me what psychological safety is, right? If you're like excited, you want to, I can't, tomorrow's gonna be so great because you're working on this thing and you're really making a difference. I mean, that's kind of what you want, right? And I think that money won't matter as much when it's that side. When people are afraid and scared and kind of like trying not to like screw it up,
Mm-hmm.
any amount of money will get them to move.
And we're talking about overcoming those fears then.
Yeah, but it's both sides, because why do they feel that way? Why do they, do they feel fearful because it's a problem in them, or do they feel fearful because it's the environment in which they work?
What you put them in.
So it's both, right? I mean, because everyone's
Yeah,
going to react differently, but I think that you want to set up a situation so that even if someone comes in there as like a slightly more fearful person, they can kind of like feel more trusting and more safe and more likely to ask the dumb questions or poke holes in something, just for the sake of making a better result. like you kind of want everyone to have that, like, to get out of their shyness. I mean, of course, like some of this is personality, but I think you really want, the goal is to make everyone feel like their voice matters, I think, as long as it's constructive.
In your business, when you're coaching or consulting, are you, you got different levels, not levels, different trainings for different people, meaning you got the person at the very on the job site, then you got the people so those in theory have the psychological fear, and then you have the ones that need to help those people be in the right spot. So you had different type of trainings for different type of people or positions.
Yeah, our whole thing is about customization. So like one of our little mottos is like, we think we can do customization at scale, right? So we don't have a problem with like we're not selling one thing. We're like a matchmaker, and we're saying like, what is your problem? And we will find people to help you solve the problem. And that to me is like so much fun, because really, like, there's no one way to solve any one problem. So what it comes out with is like, let's say someone says, my problem is, and I'm just gonna make this up, workplace safety. We have higher than average injuries at my organization, and I would like to lower them. And so then what we do is we create a request for proposal, and we send it out to all of our coaches, and they will send in their proposals. And what's cool is then the buyer can like have 20 proposals of like what should be done. And the buyer can say, oh, I like X, I like Y, like, or they can say, these are all great, or you can say whatever you want. And the idea is that you then have all these experts saying like, based on my experience, here's what I think you should do. And you can decide which you want to go for. And you can also then, there's even more negotiation beyond that. But the idea is that, I'm not an expert, and I'm not really a coach. I'm really like a matchmaker and someone who like believes really strongly in making a better world, kind of like having like a more psychologically safe world where we all are happier. But so we're trying to like have the coaches make it easy to find these people who are experts or coaches or whatever, so they can help the people who have the problem, solve the problem.
Obviously, the sooner the better to start would be great. Is there a certain level of beginner? I mean, for example, a lot of my listeners can go from, a couple employees to hundreds. Um, is there a level where it's the easiest to start, like 2 or 3, and
Oh,
then create that base, and then as you grow, continue that culture?
yeah. I mean, one thing I really like is the idea of almost doing like a beta, which is like a kind of a tech term, but you know what I mean? Like a test, maybe with
Hmm.
like one team, and saying, okay, let's try it with this one group. And one of the things you can do when you do a little test like that is you can measure it against other teams and the broader organization. So you can come up with metrics, and even you can see what's happening to the organization at large as a result of that training and coaching. And then if it works, then you can say, oh, cool, this is really working for us, or here's ways we can tweak it to make it better work for us. And then we can open it up to the broader organization. But that way I really do like, because you have the data and you can say like, it's more like a test, and it's not as much of an investment. And so you can just say like, okay, let's see what's happened as a result of this, and have some of our metrics changed, or is this group different materially from this other similar group who didn't have the coaching, and we can compare them and see like, oh wow, the group that had the coaching, they're actually higher safety, with
Yeah.
lower errors, lower injuries, that kind of thing. And then like, well, that's worth it to me, right? Because if they lower their injuries by like 2% after 4 months, if we can get the whole company to lower injuries by 2% after a year, like what does that save us? It's like that kind of conversation.
Kind of like rollouts where you start it. So in this case, if we're a smaller business, we can use the whole company. But if you're a huge business, you can take a group, whatever that looks like, and then say, okay, let's test this, see if it works. This works well with suggestion boxes too, I think, because if you think it sounds good on paper until you really put it into place, but you try it, see how it, measure it, monitor it, and if it does work, then you roll it out to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Uh, the McRib didn't start across the nation at one time.
Exactly. Oh, and those chains are always doing stuff like that. Like you can get the lobster roll in Maine, but
Oh
not
yeah,
anywhere else. They're always, yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think that, like, to me, the coolest part of all of this is just that there are numbers that are connected to something that sounds kind of woo-woo. And like that to me is, I think what's so cool is that there really is like data and hard science about this. And like, that's what a test can really like show for you is like, and by the way, you could do, let's say, you could say, okay, these people really voted for negotiation, how to be better at negotiation. We brought them in some training about negotiation. We worked on that for 3 months. And looking at the data, that wasn't that helpful in my organization. Maybe you switch. Maybe you're like, okay, what was the second thing you wanted to learn? Or what do I think you should learn? Maybe you test that. Because it's not like it's going to always work, right? I think that like we all assume that it's going to work well. And so far what I've seen is when people vote for something, it does work really well. But there's always going to be a situation where there might be a disconnect, and maybe even the match wasn't great. So it's not it's not like I don't want to paint a picture of like everything's going to be magical and unicorns when this starts to happen, but more likely than not, things will improve. And then you're sort of on the path to finding new ways for your organization to just be more effective.
Wrapping up, I have a question for my smaller groups who don't have, say, human resource people or R&D staff or to that effect. Where you mentioned, like, for example, in the hospital example, that 20% turnover was the average.
Right.
And they were at 24, and then they went down to 4. Where does that information come from? That I'm a small company, don't know what's good, what's bad. I just know that's what I am or where I'm at.
Oh, good question.
How do I find out? How do I find out from that? You might say Google, you might say ChatGPT for that matter, but where do you find that information at?
Yeah, I think the people that really track it are the like associations, like the association groups. So like, I mean, usually I'm just looking it up online. Like when I was looking at, talking to you, I think it's something like 64% is the average for construction employee turnover. Mm-hmm. So that's really high, and that's painful. And it's a giant pain in the butt. So. Yeah, and so I think that like, and that's from the interweb, right? So that's an amalgamation of all the things people are saying, but probably like the really good numbers, if you want to be sure you're getting accuracy, is to go to any kind of industry association who compiles this sort of thing, because they'll be the repository of what exactly is happening.
I do have one last question now that you brought something. My mind can go forever. I got 5 minutes. How important is training to retention? I know you talked about the meeting training, but I'm talking about advancement training.
Oh,
or perfecting skills training, that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's all the same thing. So here's a really interesting statistic. There's this organization called the Work Institute, and every year they put out a report about, it's called the retention report. And pretty much every year, the top 3 reasons, one of the top 3 reasons people leave, it changes a little bit every year, but it's basically because of advancements, professional advancement. It's like professional advancement, workplace, like environment, and money, and they all are switching all the time.
And they go all the good, yeah.
Yeah, it's always a little bit different, but the idea is that it's always the top. And the point is, like, I don't think you have to promote someone. Like, okay, so the one thing I would say is, like, you have to give people the skills and the ability and the support to grow in all the ways, right? So, for instance, if they're in, like, I'm just going to make this up, like a director level, and they want to be promoted to the next level up, then you have to be super clear about what that next level has, what that next level needs, and those skills, and then map out what does that person have, and then, how can they get those skills. But then the other issue with business owners that they always say is like, well, what if there's no spot? And that is true. There may not be a spot. But here's what I say is that you have to give people the opportunity to grow and let the chips fall where they may, because everyone's not going to be CEO. Like, you might have like a 5,000 person company, and you're giving everyone the opportunity to have the skills to be CEO, but maybe that guy's in the position for 10 years, and then the people below him are in position for 20 years, and there just may not be a position, but it doesn't mean that that's a reason not to help people grow. because the growing is what keeps them staying, which is crazy.
That's right. No, that's true.
In the old way, and like when I was, so I'm a Gen X, and when I was a young employee, the perspective was, you learn on your own time. I'm not going to pay for you to get better at your job, because then you'll just leave. But it's actually the opposite. It's especially Gen Z, they expect professional development on the job as part of their compensation. And that's what keeps people staying. And so even if they're not getting promoted, if they're like growing through their brain, that is that provides retention.
Gotcha. Well, Francie, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It was so
This has
fun.
been fun. That's been fun, talking about how to keep people and getting in their minds and how to make them better at what they do. How I'm going to put how we get hold of you down in the show
Oh, right,
notes.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. And anything else? Any closing remarks before we go?
No, just, I mean, if they're looking to find me, terawatt.co is the website, no M. And we have a get in touch page, so definitely get in touch. And the other social media that I'm kind of active on is LinkedIn. So
Awesome.
Francie Jain on LinkedIn or Terawatt on LinkedIn.
That'll be down in the show notes. Also down in the show notes, if you'd like to discuss something or further your business, become that CEO, don't break your back, build your business. In the show notes, get a free consultation with me, Chris G. And we'll see you again next week on Hard Hat CEO.